One thing I would say is if we're going to talk OSR and we're talking Shadowdark, it's important for you to keep in mind that to the grognards out there, this is not OSR.
So
this is new SR.
It depends on who you're talking to. And we talked about it with Ben Melton as well. And recently also, like, Indestructible Boy asked a bunch of people to try to define it. And a lot of people said that there's multiple answers. Like Ben Melton says, and he's kind of an expert on it, right?
Yeah,
he does OSR shows constantly. Like that's his topic.
Always reviewing OSR stuff.
Yeah,
that's all he does.
And he said that nobody can agree on what is OSR. So I would say not even all of the grognards would say that it isn't. Some would say that it is, and it's because there's multiple camps. I remember that Ben split it as two of the main ones, but this is vastly oversimplifying things to say that because there's really like dozens, would be old school revival versus old school renaissance.
Correct.
Where old school revival is like, no, we just want to revive what we already had. This is going to be more or less a clone of classic D&D.
Right.
Or to be old school revival. But OSR as a whole can't even agree on what the R stands for.
I was going to say that. And I bring that up all the time.
Shadowdark is definitely old school Renaissance.
And that is the term I use all the time. In fact, a lot of times I try to stay away from specifically saying OSR. And I will say, oh, it's got the old school vibe to it. And a lot of people who follow the gaming gang understand what I mean by that. So to me, there are some things, in my opinion, that really stand out about something that is old school Renaissance. And one of the first things is that it is not necessarily rules driven. There's a saying for the OSR, which is it's rulings, not rules. So you don't necessarily have 1,000-page rule book that's got, oh, well, let's talk about grappling as opposed to wrestling, as opposed to, no, you don't get into that. Now, I think, in my opinion, I find what a lot of people are really interested in with the OSR, especially if they're coming from, say, 5e D&D or Pathfinder 1st or 2nd edition, is that the focus is on the adventure, not on the characters. So character creation tends to be pretty quick, pretty streamlined. You don't have all the various different options you would have with, say, Pathfinder 2nd edition, which in my opinion has probably the most customization out of any player character generation. And I think a lot of people dig that because at least my feelings about the OSR is I feel your characters should grow by way of the adventuring as opposed to, well, I've got this huge long backstory and now my dungeon master has to figure out a way to incorporate that into this adventure. And maybe it's because I come from a game master's background. I very rarely have an opportunity to actually play a role-playing game as a player. But I think a lot of people really dig the fact that it's more about this as opposed to your dice rolls. You won't see as many dice rolls in an OSR game as you will, say, in a 5e D&D game.
I'm tired of playing my favorite tabletop RPGs as one of the old boring races. I don't want those generic, store-brand backstories. I want to roll a character with a bit more character. Well, Roll for Combat is here to help with their incredible new book, Battle Zoo Ancestry's Classic Creatures, which gives you the power to create the character of your dreams. Dig into 12 unique playable monster races in this beautifully printed, massive, hardcover book filled with in-depth descriptions, abilities, lore, and more. Send that dusty old dwarf right back to the mines and live out your isekai fantasy by becoming an actual intelligent weapon that you wield yourself. Or you could let a friend grab you instead. Teamwork. Put that elf back on the shelf and become a sentient dungeon, complete with traps, treasures, and a living avatar. You could even put an end to the age of man and become a shape-shifting mimic. You know, those things that gave you trust issues ever since you were eaten by one in Dark Souls? Oh, that could be you. Click the link below or head on over to battlezoo.com to secure your copy of Battlezoo Ancestry's classic creatures today and become the life of your adventuring party.
Yeah, I think that what you're getting at is close to my answer to sort of Steven's thesis, maybe even a rebuttal, because I disagree that it's all about what Steven thinks it's all about.
So what does Steven think it's all about?
He thinks it's all about the dying. I think it's not, and that the dying is a side effect. But I will make the analogy to Dark Souls, because Steven makes that a lot too.
Sure.
Dark Souls is also not about the dying. People don't play Dark Souls or OSR being like, I'm playing this because I want to die a lot of times. They're playing it because, like you said, Jeff, it's about this. They want it to be about player skill. And for the old school Renaissance definition that Ben gave us was that it's, you know, it's often about player skill. It's about emergent gameplay that comes from using either random tables or setting things out and letting the players decide what they are going to do, rather than just sort of like the narrative railroading you forward. And the players, not the characters, make a lot of decisions, use a lot of their own smarts to outwit the scenario. In some cases, by refusing to engage in a, quote, fair fight. And because of that, an actual, quote, fair fight is very, very dangerous. And you have a decent chance of dying. And that incentivizes you to use your creativity to not fight. Some of them, like Ben's own game, Nave, directly even says in the game, you're encouraged to find a way to avoid a fight because it will be very dangerous. Like, that's just in the game rules, so that people know that by the time it's got to a fight, it's already past the point it could have been if you used your player skill to try to, like, I don't know, push a giant rock on them from above or like bypass around it. So I think that, like Dark Souls, people enjoy the fact that their skill is being shown off, not their character being a mighty wizard or a strong fighter. Their ingenuity is letting them bypass things and do something so impossible, so difficult, that it would have a good chance of killing people. And the deaths are a side effect and be like, oh, well, you know, I died. Some people in our chat said that's a skill issue as their response to when Steven was talking about it. And the idea that the game encourages you to be like, yes, that is a skill issue, rather than more modern style games would be like, well, no, that's something that we talk about as a group. We want to know when death is on the table. We're going to figure out how to handle death. It's a very different philosophy. And I think it's not focused on death, but the death has to be a part of that challenge to make it about the players and their decisions.
There has to be risk. That's how I look at it. And that goes for any sort of role-playing game. My investment in a game as a player is far higher when I know that, you know what, we really have a possibility of failure. And that failure carries the risk of some of the player characters are going to buy the farm. It could happen. Whereas in most modern role-playing games, and I'll use 5e D&D as a great example, you'll find that the players tend to be more focused on what is my character getting out of this, as opposed to we're all working together as a team. And a lot of times I see players of, say, 5e D&D, when they are presented with a challenge, the first thing they're looking at is their character sheet to see, well, what kind of feat or skill or ability do I have that I'm going to roll dice for, as opposed to, how would we address this challenge if we were in this situation? So another great example is if you look at, say, a 5e D&D approach to disarming a trap to the old school Renaissance way of disarming a trap. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's all dice rolls. In the OSR, it's the exploration of, okay, so what does this trap look like? Well, what kind of mechanism may this have that sets it off? if we set it off, what does it do? It just, to me, I find that sort of gameplay to be far more engaging for at least the players that I have grown up with who are part of my gang, than as opposed to, okay, here's your character sheet. Go find out what can you roll for to get past this problem.
I say, all right, here's the thing. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and watching a lot on basically Shadowdark. Now, it's funny. I don't call them OSRs. I call it two things. I either call it old school or I call it DCC, because I've been playing DCC for Goodman Games for probably 20 years now. So in my mind, that predates even the OSR revolution, because DCC was doing it before there was OSR. And DCC always had that old school feel to them. Everything from the layout of the books to everything. I mean, they
emerged close together.
Yeah,
they were pretty close, Steven.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the early OSR was in the very early 2000s.
Okay, yes. I only remember it more recently, and I've only really
Do you
seen
remember
it explode.
Castles and Crusades and Osric?
Yeah, but
Castles and Crusades, I think, was 2004 or something.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right about then.
Okay.
That's a cool game too. I talk about that quite a bit. I'm pretty tight with the Troll Lords. So and the funny thing is, Dungeon Crawl Classics, I think, is just an absolutely fantastic game. It's for a specific kind of crowd. It's not for everybody. But funny enough, a lot of people out there say, oh, no, that's not OSR.
But
two people in the chat have already said that. And it really just depends on your own definition. Like, those people in the chat are right for their definition of OSR. And I'm not going to weigh in and say one definition is right, because I feel like Ben knows like more about all the different ways that this goes by reviewing all those OSR games than almost anyone. And if he says it's muddled and nobody knows for sure, I'm going to say everybody's right.
But
I like the Renaissance definition, because to me it feels more inclusive of the spirit of player skill, the spirit of like emergent gameplay, and that you could have more games that are included in it, which I think is a cool thing. But to some people, actually narrowing it down has a benefit as well, because if it gets too big, you don't know what it is anymore. So I think any definition is fine if that's the one you want to use.
So anyhow, back to the death part. Here's the thing. Whenever I hear people talk about, especially a lot now, because a lot of people are talking about Shadowdark, they talk about two things. They talk about the torch mechanic, which everyone talks about, and they talk about characters dying. And I'm not saying that's the definition. I'm just saying what I've been hearing, and I think it's because, now think about it, D&D 5th edition, which, for better or for worse, is what a lot of people play, and they only play that. It's been out for 10 years.
Yep.
And let me tell you, I don't think people were playing 4th edition too much before that. So this is the majority of what people are playing, and that's 5th edition. So to them, having characters die is novel and new. This is something they probably have never seen before, or extremely rare, let alone at this rate. So I agree with you, Mark, in theory that death is a side effect of the game, but it happens to be something that is, it's like seeing a science fiction movie with special effects or without. Seeing a science fiction movie from the 60s versus today. It's like if you saw a movie in the 60s that was filmed today, you would be talking probably about the special effects, not the science fiction elements of the movie. And I think it's kind of the same thing. It's like, yeah, it's a game and it has everything you were saying, but the death part, which is just an aspect of the game, is so novel and new to these people that that's what they're talking about.
I can see that having the shock value,
right? But
I would say it's not why people want to play the game. It's like someone in chat got the idea of what I was saying. It was like TSL something.
I think you're wrong, because I think
TSL frontman who was saying that like in Dark Souls you don't want to die. Death is very significant to the gameplay, which is precisely why you don't want to die. But what they like is that they can die.
Correct.
And they like avoiding it, seeing that it can happen, seeing that it easily can happen if they mess up. And they like having actually not died a lot of times in a row once they see that they can die, because then they're like, this means something. I accomplished
the stakes
something.
are higher.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you. There
are some stakes involved. And if somebody's going to play a role-playing game and they're going to fight monsters or have to try to disable a trap or what have you, even if they're having to worry about the environment they're in, knowing that, hey, this could be the end of my character, gets those juices flowing a little bit, as opposed to, oh, okay, well, we all failed our roles, but hey, now this NPC shows up out of nowhere and saves us. Yay!
Yeah, I mean, Mark knows as well. I talk about my games a lot, and my games, even though we play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they are really hard, and my players, they like it. I mean, I hit them hard, and they almost always drop. They're always resurrecting and retreating and pulling back their characters, and they like the challenge. Now, no one's actually in this one game people have died, but in this game where they're level 16, no one's died, but these guys also run away. Like they're smart, and they've been playing, since the 70s, so they know the deal, and they're not afraid to regroup and realize they might die, and they have to think about, like, this is not just, oh, we win. So they enjoy that challenge. So I don't even need OSR, in my opinion. I could just do it in Pathfinder.
Well, if you're doing it specifically for that, you wouldn't need it. But if your players want to have more emergent gameplay, more things where they, as the player, get to decide something and their character doesn't need the capability to do it, it's just they came up with it, then OSR could still be good for them.
That's true. Well, good luck. I've tried to convince them, and they always
that's
say,
fair. I know
they never want to try anything else. But
I do want to make a comment to the chat, though, because there was someone in chat who said, just because Ben has reviewed so many OSR games on his channel, that doesn't mean he necessarily knows about it if he hasn't created an OSR game. Well, good news, because he created Knave and Knave 2nd Edition, and has been like, he is just a pillar of, in general, the OSR community, and has been involved with lots of stuff there. So he's not just a YouTube reviewer of OSR games. He is he is deeply into that. His channel is Questing Beast, and he does a lot of stuff.
When I was hanging out with him at Gen Con, I first met him at Gen Con this year. Or actually it was last year, and we were hanging out actually every day, and he introduced himself literally. It's like, oh yeah, I do OSR, and that's it. Like, that's, because I said, oh, you should come on the channel. He goes, that's all I talk about. I was like, okay. It's like he literally doesn't talk about anything else.
He knows so much about it. He was super enlightening, and I think people should go back to our episode with him if you're interested in this topic. It's in I can find the link.
Yeah, or just look up Questing Beast.
It was an amazingly good episode, and I feel like I learned a lot from that episode too.
By the way,
there are a lot of folks out there who do cover the OSR. That you can really kind of get some of the brain pickings that they share out there.